right, everybody, I want to welcome you to Inside the Magic Circle. This is Jason Augustus Newcomb, and today I am talking to a fellow who I frequently call my personal magical doppelganger. He's a person who has a similar name to me in many ways, and ironically enough, fitting with the theme of that, he sent me some introductory remarks about him this morning, and literally they could have been remarks that I wrote, almost word for word, exact the kind of things that I write. He's a practical magician. He doesn't emphasize his initiations, though he's had a number of them. He teaches a bunch of courses, and he's written a number of books. So if you think I'm interviewing myself, you're wrong. I'm actually interviewing the amazing occultist Jason Miller. How are you doing today, Jason?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. Did I get enough of your introduction in for you to feel satisfied, or is there anything else you want to add?
Nope. Plenty of the introduction there. I'm a sorcerer. I teach magic. That's really the gist of it.
So I want to let the viewers know that this is actually the second time we've done this. We had an almost what will almost be an identical conversation, although so many things have happened since then that it couldn't be. But a lot of the questions I have I still want to go over. But we had the conversation, a very long, extended, wonderful. I felt like we as that guy who neither of us just are into would say, we fell in love during the conversation, and it was great. And then the next day I realized that something had gone wrong in the technical aspect of it, and you could hear me talking, but you were just like because I was just gone. So now this is and it's literally it's got to be at least 10 years, right? I mean, it's
probably.
I think you might have had the protection and reversal magic, but I think you might have only had Sorcerer's Secrets at that time.
Well, Sorcerers and Secrets came next. So the Sorcerers and Secrets, I actually submitted the manuscript to that like 2 weeks before my kids were born.
Okay.
And so my kids are 11. They turned 11 this summer. So,
And so you're saying Protection and Reversal Magic was actually the first book that you wrote?
Yeah, that came out first.
Well, like in my experience, that's true of your universe, the doppelganger Jason Miller universe, but in the Jason Newcomb version, I was aware of the Sorcerer's Secrets first, largely because its cover was like a much nicer version of the cover of a book that I had just finished right around that same time period. So it's like, oh man, his looks way better. He's hired some sort of artist to do like this. Here we go. See, I had to pick it up eventually. The cool like hand thing. I was like, wow, that's so neat. What is the meaning of this symbol? It seems like it's not just a picture. There's something more.
No. So that symbol is something a friend of mine and I came up with. I said, I had Hecate kind of triggered this vision of a sorcerer's seal,
sure.
a logo, if you will. And within it, it's the hand in the eye represents the wisdom and, fucking shit up with your hands, like the ability to manipulate things, but also see them clearly. And then it's got, the torch and the key for, again, illumination and the ability to unlock what is illuminated. It's got the serpent and some particular star seals that were important to when I started strategic sorcery. So
if you take the strategic sorcery class, do you learn what this is about, or is that just something that is?
I think I have something in that book about what the seal is all about. But
it's possible you do. And I did read this entire book. I don't want you to think that I didn't, but
it's old. It's old.
It was a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it's old news.
So, but what's interesting?
It's not a secret or anything.
You've been teaching Hecate. I wanted to mention. You say Hecate, and I say Hecate. And
we have to fight now.
No, I mean, we can if you want. We can battle it out. Which there's only room for one, Jason. But no, I mean,
there's a lot of Jasons. So.
No, I know it's true.
You remember the mystical order of Jasons that just appeared on FB one day? Like we all woke up.
There. Everyone stopped talking on it.
Yeah.
But so anyway, I mean, the things that match between our lives, we're both fathers of both have a family. We both have like made our career about magic and largely about teaching magic. We both offer services related to magic. We're both named Jason. We're both from the Northeast. There's a lot of we're both husky men. So so there's a lot of areas where you and I cross paths with each other. But the reason I want to bring up Hecate and Hecate is I'm sure there's a correct way to do it, and I'm going to defer to you. I had a girlfriend who was like a big devotee of Hecate at the time we were together, so that's probably what has influenced my pronunciation. But in magic, so often people get caught up in these weird details. What is the correct way to do this fundamentally very unimportant thing? Now, I mean, someone might say, if you call Hecate or Hecate and you're not pronouncing it right, you're offending her. Ask her whether that's true. I mean, don't worry about it. But I think a lot of people get caught in these things. And I know you're a very practical guy. And I think that, one of the reasons I wanted to do this series of interviews is because I would really like to have all of us humanized to a certain extent. All of us, like who we are as people, what we actually are doing magically, what are our limitations, who are we actually? Because people will either think we're villains of some sort, or they'll think that we're these divine beings that are somehow doing something so fundamentally different from what they're doing that that they could never get to that level. And I encounter it over and over again, especially with people who aren't me. With me, they're like, no, but Jason, I get it, you're an idiot. But all these other writers, they're so. I'm just kidding. So anyway, tell me a little bit about how you first came to be interested in magic and the occult.
Oh God. Well, the how I first became interested in magic and the occult, it goes way back to experiences I had when I was just 5 years old. I had sort of a psychic experience. I was looking down at the sand in the playground because people our age, we didn't have padded. We just had metal jungle gyms on sand and concrete. And those of us that survived. So, I was looking down at the sand, and then I looked up, and it was like the whole world was just still down there, like a two-dimensional painting at my feet. So I was looking up into something else. And from that point on, for the next couple years, actually, I would have these periods of like lost time where things would freeze and I would sense other beings in the room, almost like alien kind of stories. Although I don't attribute it to that. Obviously, I think more in terms of spirits. And then it went away. And then I was like 14 and kind of got my eye drifted towards tarot.
Me too.
And then weirdly, just teachers started to come out of the woodwork. So a talented and gifted teacher, she's retired now, so I can say her name is Blanche Krubner. She like popped out of the woodwork and just asked if I had a tarot deck and did I want one? And at the time, I mean, I couldn't drive, so I had no idea even that they were sold at the local Walden Books,
Again, a similar story that people who know me will know. I have told that a very similar tale. But what was your first tarot deck that you ended up having?
It was the standard Rider-Waite.
The Rider-Waite?
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, dude.
It's a good one to start with.
Oh, it is, for sure.
I would start people with the Marseille now, and then just they would stay there for the rest of their lives. But with any of the, they would bounce around between the different Marseilles.
Pause button. Why are you so into the Marseille at this point?
I am so into the Marseille because about 8 years ago, I completely re-looked at how I read tarot.
Okay.
I completely threw out everything I knew about tarot because what I noticed is that there are readers who are esotericists, occultists, and there are readers who are cartomancers. who just, they read the cards. And I remember the first time I ever had a reading from somebody that was just a card reader. It was in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And my head was just full. I was like 22. My head is full of Aleister Crowley and Tree of Life and elements and things like this. And this woman is giving me this reading. And she's not even following like a layout. And I'm like,
right.
What is she doing? She's just throwing cards down. She's not relating this to the Tree of Life at all. She doesn't know anything. Of course, she's giving me a completely accurate and really insightful reading.
Uh-huh.
But, you know, I'm such a cocky 22-year-old who thinks everything is about Kabbalah and Crowley that I'm just like, ugh, you know, whatever. And of course, she predicted all these things that came to be accurate. So about 8 years ago, I started to investigate more about how readers read cards. And I think the first person to really clue me into the difference was Paul Hewson, and his sort of reading in line. And so
author of Mastering Witchcraft.
Right. And so I started to look at how it really is just all about the damn pictures, right? And how one card relates to another. That's how...
Well, that's one of the reasons why I question the Marseille Tarot, especially for a beginner, because, I mean, you know, over, you know, like 60, 70% of the deck is just these weird swirly shapes that don't have any real...
Well, see, that's the thing. The cards in the majors, right? It's all the very similar artwork, and it's so sparse that it becomes about the questioner rather than, you know, the cat people or the pandas or whatever the specialty tarot deck is about. So when you're reading...
Are you implying that those are the two choices? You can either have the Marseille or the pandas?
Yeah. So, well, you know, obviously there's a lot of shades in there. But, if you're looking at the Marseille Tarot and you're looking at the Empress, right? And then you're looking at the star. Well, the star looks like the Empress because all the way. So it's the, you know, you can almost see her taking the clothes off and dumping the water, you know, or Temperance. You can see Temperance holding the two cups, and the two cups will look alike. And so then when she's the star, she drops the wings, drops the water. There's a continuity in there.
Sure.
When you look at the instead of so the symbolism in the Marseille Tarot, it's the subtle symbolism of design. So the Fool is in exactly the same position as Death in almost all Marseille Tarot from the Noblette on. It's like an X-ray of the Fool card. And of course, typically speaking, the Fool card has no number and Death has no name. It's just listed as 13 with nothing on the bottom. So there are so many kind of secrets and integrations that is in this pattern that really was tarot from
a long time,
1618 until now for a lot of people. Whereas,
realistically speaking, though, I mean, I don't think the tarot or playing cards were really used for divination until fairly late in that period.
Well, by the time the French tarot was evolved, it was used for divination. And the thing is that cards and reading and games, it's all the manipulation of fate. The integration of games of chance and Fortune's Wheel from in the era that this came out with, one of the reasons that games were so reviled is it challenged the idea of preordination and so on.
Sure.
So there's a lot more to that game versus divination thing than is let on. But when we start to say throw on all the Kabbalah and the elements and all this stuff onto tarot that was not really part of it originally. That symbolism, we stop looking at, well, which, the magician's feet are facing opposite one another. So does this marks this bit of unsurety. as he's on this three-legged table, as opposed,
Well,
and instead we start going, oh well, what is the Hebrew letter associated with this? Where on the tree of life is this? And then we eventually develop these things like the Heindel Tarot, which basically looks like somebody blew up an occult store in 1984 and just took snapshots of all the shit flying around.
I mean, I would say that the Magician card is one of those cards that really, I mean, it's one of the more important ones for really looking at the tarot as being entirely different from the Kabbalistic perspective you see in the Golden Dawn. And because the Magician card, as it is in the Marseille deck and other older decks, it's very clear that he is a juggler, he is a mountebank, he is a con man doing magic tricks or even fakery of some sort. We even see a similar painting by what's his name? I can't remember the artist's name, but he has a painting from the 15th or 16th century that shows a magician with almost the identical stuff on the table that you see on those tarot cards. And in that painting, there's a kid behind the person watching most closely who's stealing the wallet out of the back of the person's pants. So I mean, like, this idea that the magician is this divine being that we see in the Rider-Waite deck is not present in those old decks at all. And so we're looking at a very different set of symbols there.
So it is. It's very different. Now,
however, the
minor cards that you mentioned,
yes.
The minor cards, what happens with the Rider-Waite and with other things, and I think Waite pulled a lot of his minor card images from the Solabusca tarot.
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, it's very obvious.
Which is sort of a different animal, but it's okay.
Was it him, or was it Coleman Smith who made that choice? Was it actually?
I don't know. I mean, I certainly think Coleman Smith doesn't get enough credit. It should never have been called the Rider-Waite. It should have been called, the Coleman Smith tarot, or at best the Waite Smith tarot.
Sure.
Rider was just the damn publisher.
Right.
But so Rider-Waite Smith is how it typically gets now, the RWS. But even then, Smith should have her name front
maybe
and
first
center.
Because she's the artist.
Exact. I feel the same way. But, when it comes to the pip cards, there's actually a beauty and a simplicity to the progression that when you start adding too much, it again gets disrupted. So take something like the 5 of Cups, right? If you've got like dripping cups of gop because it's a bad card or it's this ominous evil pattern or something, then it's sort of like it takes it out of the context of the reading and just layers all this stuff onto that card itself. Whereas if somebody's coming and, like, let's say their family treats them poorly, right? And so you've got other cards indicating that they should leave. And then you've got the 5 of Cups. Well, the 5 of Cups is the destabilizing of the family. So 4 is stable. It's your 4 walls, etc. 5 is breaking out of that stability.
Right.
But if we automatically attribute
negativity,
the lack of stability is evil and bad and ominous, then it colors that reading. So when it comes to the Marseille, I actually really appreciate the simplicity of the pip cards.
However, from the perspective of a beginner, it's more intimidating to look at a bunch of, because I mean, it's particularly the Marseille deck. They're very stylized. But I want to ask you a question. I was put off of it for years and years and years, but it's actually not easier for a beginner. Okay.
It's not.
I don't know that I've ever been a beginner, except in my teenage years that I barely remember. But so I mean, like but have you worked as a professional reader at all, or do you primarily just use readings as an adjunct to magic that you're doing with people?
So I have worked as a professional reader. At the moment, I don't offer any services or readings for hire. I've cut all that out of my business.
Interesting.
But
I shy away from it all.
Yeah. I focus only on teaching now. But I have done, many professional readings.
Well, the reason I ask is because I've that's actually for many years, I've really, especially with coronavirus and stuff, but even before that, I've pulled back quite a bit. But I worked for many years as just a reader, and in fact, I wouldn't even let people know that I was a magician because I didn't want to muddy the waters there. But one thing that I noticed is that a lot of people who are just card readers, like you were describing, they actually tend to be the most likely to be offering services outside of the reading, whereas the more sort of, in fact, I would say that the kind of reader that you or I would be, because we've studied Golden Dawn stuff and we've studied this Kabbalah stuff and blah 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 blah. We've read Levi, and we've read this. That is the absolute exception within the professional reader community. Like, none of them. And in fact, when I introduce these esoteric concepts, they're like, "Wow, you're doing this in a very different way than the way that that I do it." Like they don't even understand where I'm coming from when I talk about that.
They are, and certainly you have that kind of reader to magic pipeline, if you will, where, oh, you've got a terrible curse and you can pay me to lift the curse. And probably the most popular divination deck of all time, the Gypsy Witch cards,
sure,
are actually designed to give negative readings. They are actually.
Well, I think the tarot is too, honestly, if you use reversals within it.
Oh, I don't.
What? No, but I mean, if you do that, then well over 50% of the cards are quite negative at that point. So there's almost no way not to give a negative reading.
Right. So there, and that is the gateway to to fraud, but at the same time, not like completely divorcing that because people use it fraudulently also can cut one off from possible services that are good. It really depends on the practitioner. I mean, I remember when I was living in Nepal, I went to see Lama Dawa, who's now passed, and he gave me a mirror reading, a few.
What is a mirror reading? Can you describe
a Melong is like a Tibetan round mirror, and he's trained for years and years with Saraswati to look at the mirror, see the answer to the question, and very clearly and precisely, to the point that he'll pull names like just right out. And it's a very matter-of-fact kind of thing. But he would then say, oh, well, I could make you a talisman to do such and such, but if I do, then you have to promise not to this, that, or the other thing. And I think he was operating in good faith, and certainly there was never any kind of, if you don't do this, then life is gonna not work out for you, and that kind of thing. So
honestly, though, I don't even know that being in bad faith is necessarily a bad thing in all cases, because I've spoken to some people who've been to readers who are clearly fraudulent, but whatever thing that they do as a result of that work opens them up spiritually in some way, so that they are actually getting some sort of transformative experience from something that was not necessarily begun in the most sincere way.
Well, it can. It's amazing what can be a catalyst for change. And
you looked like you were disagreeing with me, and I want to hear what you think is wrong. You don't have to agree with me. I don't want to be agreed with.
No, I get it. I would not want anyone to. I think bad faith actors have no way of knowing how that's going to be taken. And,
sure, of course, they're acting in bad faith.
Would use that and say, well, I do this, but look at this guy. He, I told him that he needed to pay me $3,000 for some ridiculous thing, and it gave him a positive outlook on life, and so he went around to succeed. And so I those things are few and far between. And honestly, one of the reasons that I stopped doing readings for people is as the more accurate I got, the worse, the less positive benefit I saw for people.
I can identify with that for sure, but you know, because like people don't want to hear the bad news. They don't want to hear. They don't want to look at stuff that is going to be painful for them, and they don't want to necessarily heal themselves from it either.
At times, I almost think, you know, you can read how something is going to go, and so if it's a good reading, then people kind of just go forward with the plans they had anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe with a bit of a cavalier attitude where they're not watching the things that they should watch.
Sure.
And if you give even the slightest warning of something that could go wrong, and when is anyone ever doing anything worthwhile that doesn't go a little wrong?
Sure.
Then you have people like, oh, well, oh my God, so I shouldn't do this. I should not open up this business because it could be a disaster, and thank you for telling me that, you know, I've had this thing. And so they either move forward with fear, or I just kind of got to the point where I would say like 80% of the people seeking a reading, I don't think had the best framework for handling whatever was given.
Right.
And therefore I didn't see it as a benefit, and so I stopped giving it.
I've changed kind of the way I do readings largely towards more like fun personality type stuff, and try and only do readings in party contexts or things where it's not being taken all that seriously, so that it's not that big. But I mean, I've literally had women ask many times, ask me about their cheating husbands, and just my facial expressions, they're like ready to file for divorce, you know, like, so it's like, you know, and that's such a weird thing to be basing your life on. The fact that I've put down a particular card that we both know looks unpromising, and now you're going to file for divorce and completely upend your life over this. Like maybe even the cheating isn't all that important. Who knows, you know, or maybe he's not, and it's just that we're misinterpreting the cards. But anyway, I want to go back to the sort of more the beginning of your life. You got drawn into the tarot, and teachers were coming to you. And who were these teachers, and what was that? What was the context in which that was happening to you?
Well, you know, like I said, I think I was a freshman in high school when this high school teacher bought me a set of tarot cards for like $12 and taught me how to read, taught me basic psychic protection and some other things through the years. Shortly after that, I encountered a root worker in Lakewood, New Jersey, at a place called the Globe African Fashions. And I don't know really what drew me into the store, but I wandered in, and then behind the counter, really, you could walk back, and there was like a whole other store of rootwork supplies.
And like sort of the standard ones that you see in your average Botanica, or strange and different things? Like Anna Riva type stuff, and that,
you'd get originals pamphlets and Anna Riva stuff, and a Key of Solomon was there. I bought my first like paperback Mathers key from him. Walter was his name. And the beauty was, I mean, I don't want to paint this as like, you know, he took me under his wing and taught me everything. It's not at all like that. But it was a place where I could go and purchase things I needed to work through, like mastering witchcraft or modern magic. And he would then show me, I would ask about, well, bend over oil, like that, and confusion, like what does that really do? And so that's when we learn about the difference between bend over and compelling and commanding versus, and what the difference is between, you know, real graveyard dirt versus vervain, and what were, so, you know, you would ask about things, and he would just talk about anything that you brought up. He would talk about it at length, how to use it, how to make a mojo, things like that. So it was just a wealth of knowledge if you'd sit there. And unfortunately, as word spread around, a lot of people would go in and they would see things like "Kiss Me, Boy" oil and think this is ridiculous, and not really get into the idea that this was magic for them. So that was, he was a huge influence. And then John Reynolds, also known as Lama Vajranatha, would be the other big early influence.
And that was a Buddhist Lama, or? He
is the first Westerner to be given Ngakpa robes, so Buddhist sorcerer, Tibetan sorcerer robes. And I met him.
Can I ask you a question? I'm a little unfamiliar with what you just said. So within the Tibetan tradition, there's a rank within the lamas of being a sorcerer.
Yeah. So here, I'll since we're Lama robe. So typically we think of lamas as shaved heads and monks' robes.
Sure.
So a ngakpa is married, or a household or practitioner. Doesn't necessarily have to be a lama, but a practitioner of tantra. And so he is the first Westerner that I know of, or that I've ever heard of, who received ngakpa Zen, which is this. It's a white and red robe to represent the three channels of the body. And so you get one, and you get an empowerment to wear it.
Is that robe there from him or from somebody else?
No, this is actually a robe from Kunzeng Dorje Rinpoche, from when I lived in Nepal. And so I received a blessing from him to wear it. But John was involved in the OTO, so he knew Western magic, but he also knew Tibetan magic and Tantra, which was the first encounter in like an initiatory system that can trace its line back over 1,000 years that I had ever encountered. And so John was a really early influence in my teens and early 20s. And then when I got more interested in Buddhism, because of an experience I had in upstate New York, I called him up and started my studies with him as not again, I mean, he's given me a lot of teachings and transmissions and things, but he also encouraged me to go seek out Tibetan lamas and to get teachings from them and how to talk to them, really.
Would you consider yourself a Buddhist at this point in your life, or?
I consider myself, yes. So I am a Buddhist. I've taken refuge, but I'm not just a Buddhist. I'm also, I have my feet into Christianity as well. I don't see things as mutually exclusive.
Well, this is an interesting area because a lot of people do see things as mutually exclusive. So, okay, so you started out early on. You were interested in tarot, and then you found a person who was doing something hoodoo related or something, and you took some inspiration from that, but you didn't really stay there. Although clearly it's influenced you, because I think one of the things that's really interesting about you is that you've had, in most of your works, there's very much a strong sense of practical magic as being the major focus of what you do, as opposed to sort of initiatory or transcendent, or like you're more interested in making things happen in the material world. And that seems, I mean, not that you are, but your writings.
No, I think that's true. I am inspired. There's a story about a burglar who once broke into the house of a great siddha, a saint. And so the siddha came home and caught him, and the burglar said, you have incredible magical powers. If I had incredible magical powers, I could be the best burglar in all of India. So how do I turn invisible, right? And so this great saint said, oh, well, that's easy. All you have to do is go to this stupa, say this mantra, circumambulate it 100,000 times. A snake will appear and a sword will appear in your hand. Chop the head off the snake, and then you will know how to become invisible. So he does this, and he does, in fact, gain the power to become invisible. But, of course, he also gains enlightenment, and he no longer wants to break into people's homes.
Sure.
So I have a deep interest in sorcery and practical magic. I always have had this calling, but I also have a calling towards the mystic. But my views on spirituality are better served in methods that emphasize effortlessness and release than effort and kind of like intense mapping and achieving this, that, and the other thing. So I think,
are you saying in the sense of, say, a religious order or an initiatory order, you're less interested in that? Is that what you mean by that?
I am less interested in that for sure. Although I've taken my fair share of initiations.
I mean, it's hard to avoid, isn't it?
It really is. You know, you'll walk into a party and you'll walk out a bishop. You know, it just happens.
Yeah, or maybe even a pope if you go to the right party. That's a little shout out to the
Discordians.
Discordians there, yeah. Okay, so you're a teen and you're getting these different influences. However, like at least for the first part of your grown-up life, it seems like you were heading down the sort of Kabbalistic, standard, influenced by the Golden Dawn sort of tradition. Only because I know that you're a member of the OTO, and there's things. I mean, that's a past tense for a lot of people, I think. Anyway, without getting into that territory too much, because there's too much else to talk about. But I mean, maybe we can get to it later, towards the end. So you're a young man, and you're getting involved in different organizations. What made you not stop at the various places because you seem to like have been presented with a number of gates. You know, there's you could have just stayed with the guy in the root shop. You could have just stayed. You could have followed the lama with the tantric background. Any of those places you could have stayed, but you kept on your journey. What made none of those places seem like stopping places, but just resting spots before you moved to the next place?
Well, so there are two things that I believed then and that I still believe now. And the first of those things is that that nobody has a lock on the truth, that there is magic that can be done just with reality itself, mm-hmm. as your only symbol set. And so that all of these maps and things like this are not fully representative of the truth.
Okay, so that perspective is actually very unpopular these days, and or at least it's growing more and more unpopular. I think it's still the dominant message, but I mean, more and more we're hearing a different story. How did that get implanted in you, and why hasn't the other stuff taken over?
To me, it's just obvious. I mean, to me, it's just obvious. But it ties into that second truth, which is that, to me, the gift of this age is that we have this exposure and
sure.
this massive ability to communicate across lines. So, whereas Walter in the shop, for instance, to be authentic to his experience growing up was to learn root work from whoever he learned it from.
Right.
And to kind of work that,
And it would have seemed strange for him to talk to a llama. Like that wouldn't have...
Like for him to, with the communications that he had available and the life that he had thrown at him, he would have had to kind of really do backflips to kind of like, but he was interested in Kabbalah.
Sure.
He was very conversant in Golden Dawn methods. So we talked about the LBRP and things like this. He knew really well Islamic mysticism and you know, taught me about Noble Drew Ali and the Morris Science Church. So the idea that like every root worker, every black root worker who was raised in root work, suddenly like that's all they know and they don't talk about or are interested in anything else, that's bullshit. I know a curandera raised in Mexico, but she's fully conversant in Franz Bardon and integrates like fluid condensers into her work.
Well, and I mean, I would argue all magic is syncretic, and anyone who doesn't think so is just literally insane. But it would be strange for a root worker or anyone else, you know, involved in a clear path to then go to a completely different path and take initiation in that and follow that for a while. You know, it's like that's like you kind of find your thing most of the time. And I'm saying this as a person, a kindred spirit. I'm not saying you should have done a different path, because your path again is quite similar to mine in a lot of ways. Although I didn't go to Nepal, but we're going to get there eventually. But what I'm asking is because a lot of people are at 15-year-old Jason Miller's spot. You know, they've been at the banquet table of all this stuff, and it's a much bigger banquet table now than we had presented to us. Like you found things by happenstance, as did I. No one knew about this stuff. There was no internet. There was nothing. You had to just like someone knew something and said something to you. That was how it all happened. But so what made you choose the direction to keep moving? What happened?
It's the room I was in. Just like Walter's room put him in there. My room in just kind of rural central New Jersey put me in contact with a teacher who is Rosicrucian influenced, we'll just call it that.
Sure.
A root worker and a tantric lama. That's the room I was in. To literally say, well, I am doing this, so I can't listen to you or pretend that you're here. La, 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 la. Like, it requires that amount of shutting yourself off instead of... So people think sometimes, and there are people who are just wildly eclectic. They're always after the next shiny thing. And that's bad. Don't get me wrong. Like, to just kind of grasp after, you know, because honestly, anything, you read one book, and 100% of it is like new if it's a new topic.
Sure.
And then the next two books, that goes down. And so then people who are dilettantes will flit to the next thing that gives them that big rush. But to actually like not be eclectic at all is a denial of one's experience. I was, you know, when I would attend things at a local store in the early 90s. There were people from the Lukumi community there. There were people from the Temple of Set there. There were people, you know, from all walks of life. So even the people that were practicing Lukumi, they were not only interested in that.
Right.
Like that's everything to me, and I don't want to even know about anything else. Nobody was like that. There was... I was listening not that long ago to a recording of Simon, like Necronomicon Simon.
Okay.
One of his talks at the Magical Child in the 70s. And there are people in there, you know, who are from the Bronx ATR communities that are there to listen to this guy talk about the Necronomicon. I think that one was about the Key of Solomon. But it's, you know, people are a lot more interested and open than you think. It's just we're currently in a reaction to those like wildly eclectic and culturally disrespectful people who will just read a couple books, declare themselves a Hungan, and then start making like Celtic Ngangas of Thelema or something like that. You know, so
that is a copyright of Jason Miller, so please do not try and market that product.
The pendulum goes to that direction, right? And so then people want to drag it all the way to the other direction and be like, no, cultural lockdown. If you're not here, you can't do anything. This should never touch that. And we should never think that like these are all complete worlds in and of themselves. We should never open it up And so you've got that kind of whole thing going on, and it's unfortunate. But it's what happens, you know. People say they swing the pendulum one way, and then people say, well, it's got to swing an equal and opposite way the other. But it really doesn't, because the way to get the pendulum to stop swinging is to bring it to the center. If you keep pulling it further and further out, it just goes more wild.
Right. Well, and one of the things, you know, I don't like to, like, when I quote Crowley, people start thinking that I'm obsessed with him. But one of the things that I actually do kind of think Crowley says that was interesting is that, and I don't think he was specifically talking about pendulum swinging, but he was talking about things getting off balance with one another. And like, if you get too close to the center and you don't let things shift out to the side, you end up, it's just stillness. There's nothing further developing. So I mean, I think pendulum swings aren't inherently necessarily bad. It's just it's a question of, you know, how, you know, like, when we get crazy in this direction and then we get crazy in that direction, and that's really the problem. But the movement isn't, like, you know, it's nice to go back and forth, but there are so many people today who really feel like, if you are interested in, you know, magic from the grimoires, if you bring something Tibetan into your head or from Buddhism, you are violating the fundamental laws of the universe. But those seem to be comfortable for you, and so
well, it's funny too, because, you know, if Trithemius had been confronted with like a Tibetan lama, right? The first thing he would have done is like, sit down, I need to suck you dry of all the information I could. And so, you know, when I think about the PGM, for instance, the Greek magical papyri, people are like, oh, well, if I'm working in that context, that is my context. There is no context. It's a mishmash of everything that the Hellenic world could get its grubby little occult seeking hands on.
If ever there was a magical work that you can't say you're not allowed to be eclectic within, it's Greek magical.
I mean, imagine if you gave the writer of some of these papyri access to the internet. Like, they would be thrilled. They would be thrilled. So, you know, this kind of close it all down, stick to this one thing. It's a way for those people to say, we need to breathe some seriousness and tenacity into something.
Sure.
And that I agree with. So, for instance, when I decided to take on a serious study of Tibetan Buddhism, because at first my relationship was with John Reynolds was really, he helped me find the people in the OTO in New York. He helped me frame a lot of Western magic stuff. He taught me about offerings in general. But we didn't really talk much for the first few years about Tibetan Buddhism at all, other than he gave me a basic interest in it. And so then when I decided, okay, I'm going to make a go of this, I instantly said, well, this is different enough from what I've done that I need to approach it from its own base, path, and fruit. So I need to spend at least 5 years doing nothing but this. I mean, I'll upkeep practices and relationships, but in general, like, this is what I'm doing for the next 5 years minimum. And then in 5 years, if I decide I want to open myself back up, I will. And if not, then I'll just stick with this.
Where did that 5 years fall in your personal journey? How old were you when that happened?
Oh, goodness. So this
were you in the OTO at that point, or
yeah, I was. I was kind of. So I was never really like a big OTO guy. They were the people that had some kind of organizational structure to meet other magicians. And that was really like the end all be all of it. So early Thalasis camp, which was the camp that I helped found in Philadelphia, we didn't do the Gnostic Mass. We didn't do Resh. We specifically said we're not doing these things. Like, it was a decision that was consciously made, that we would focus on magic, and people would get initiated and they would have those bonds, but, you know, it was not Crowley obsessed at all.
You were wanting to be more of a magical lodge, it sounds like, where you were
Right.
doing more.
Right. And so that was the early camp. And then most of us that originated spun out in our own directions. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say my 5 years from the point that I was like 24 to 29, I think I turned 29 in Nepal, or maybe 28, I don't remember. But when I came back from Nepal, that was when I started to feel like, okay, I need to reopen myself to the larger world. That was when I had my Hecate experience in Nepal. And she said, when you come back, offer me a supper and we'll get some shit rolling. And
it's funny because there's a joke among some of my friends that the path of so many magicians is that they join Thelema or Satanism and then Thelema, and then from there they graduate to Buddhism, and from there they graduate back to neo-paganism. that's where they end up spending their life, because it's like it's the largest umbrella, and so you can find a lot of friends that way. So
it is, and I mean, if you want to say that the OTO has a success story, I would say the amount of people that passed through its doors and onto other things is itself
right.
a marker of success, at least for the early grades. So,
one of my sort of influences with the OTO is a gentleman named Jim Wasserman, and he recently passed away, and he at a certain point in my life, he was like, Jason, your destiny is not within the OTO. You really need to do your own thing, because that's who you are. And it was very freeing. At the moment, it kind of stung me a little bit. Then I was like, you know what? He's right. That's, it's not.
At my Minerval initiation, Jim Garvey came up to me and said, are you serious about wanting to learn magic and become more than human? And I was like, yeah, man.
Right?
And he was like, you should drop all this and get a copy of Initiation into Hermetics and work your way through it. And
interesting. So did you do that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I didn't drop,
right.
I didn't drop Crowley at that time, but I did work my way through Initiation into Hermetics.
It's interesting because I don't see that much Franz Barden in your work, but so how was he an influence on the things that you've done moving forward?
Franz Barden, I don't get into his evocation stuff very much. But in terms of psychic training, in terms of the importance of the elements, it was really influential.
Sure.
And so as far as that goes, because what I actually found is that the pore breathing and stuff from Franz Barden,
right,
was actually a great training for what eventually became a much higher importance on the elements in Tantra. And so wherever you see the elements emphasized in my work,
that's
it
Franz
may
Barden.
come through Tantra, but really, it's really rooted in those early Franz Barden experiments that then got kind of taken and built up. But recently I taught in one of my classes about the elements, and someone said, well, what about the planets? They're so much more important than the elements. And I said, no, they're not. They're not even remotely anywhere near as important as the elements. I can't remember the last time like Jupiter, like in excess of Jupiter, leveled a trailer park, or or just took out a city or something like that. Trust me, the elements are a lot more important.
The four elements are definitely more in your face. But that's what I was talking about. There's a practicality to the way that you approach things, a groundedness, an expression of the real world. Whereas, I mean, in many ways, those planets are the things that influence us inside and the things that influence us as we're sort of returning to the divine in one way or another. That we're either picking up or getting rid of various planetary aspects as we're moving through whatever version of spheres you're wanting to go through. But you are very much a person who focuses in the real world.
Yeah, but I don't see a non-real world. I'm kind of in
Yeah. Okay. Let me
dark,
edit what I said. The
but you know what?
material, the
Like,
clearly material
let's put
world.
it this way: I don't like this. The Hermetic sublunar, like the elements are here, and then we've got the moon and all that beyond. I don't believe that there is a beyond the elements.
Hmm.
I don't believe that the elements that a lunar sphere free of the elements or elemental considerations exists. And certainly the death process is all about the elements and the breaking
Sure.
down and so on, and the mind as well. So um yeah.
So I want to change gears away from chronology here in a second, but I just want to ask one more question. So you're in Nepal and you're studying Buddhism, and you describe a Hecate experience that is I'm not familiar with it. It must be in a different book than the ones that I've read, but it's something that is part of your sort of personal life story and an important change moment. Did that make you not so interested in following the Buddhist path anymore, or how did that integrate with that?
Well, the thing about the Buddhist path is I was never interested in becoming a monk. I was always interested in magic. And so I still honor Padmasambhava every day, who would be the guru figure in the Nyingmapa school, the old school that I primarily belong to. But Tantra gave me a tool set and a way of thinking about magic and how it works. And so what happened is I was in a town called Pashupatinath, where they burn the dead at the river. Like most people, I think, are familiar with the way Varanasi is set up, where they burn the dead on the Ganges.
Mm-hmm.
So in Nepal, there's a similar setup on a smaller scale at the Bagmati River. And I was sent there by Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche to meditate on impermanence. So for 3 days, I'm sitting there and I'm watching bodies burn and become consumed in flame, and seeing myself as the person on the pyre and all that. And at a certain point, that sort of like you're here but no one else is kind of thing happens. Like, and I saw this woman dressed in she just had a plain kind of saffron gown, orangey saffron gown. She had muddy feet and 2 torches. And so this is
all familiar Hecate.
Right.
symbol.
Right.
Yeah.
Very typical symbolism. And so she said that, I have something to teach you. And I said, well, I'm here doing this. So, whatever, just, I'm not interested. I'm doing this, because that's how you handle things in meditation, right? Like,
Sure.
if the Buddha himself shows up, you got to say, dude, I'm meditating. Fuck off later on. So Hecate is like, you are going to return home. And when you do, go to the crossroads and offer a supper. So, of course, I eventually came back to the United States. But it was when I came back to the United States, I knew I had this burning desire to kind of reopen my worldview back to the larger world of magic. Because I think you can get lost from just viewing the reality as it is, and just start viewing everything through the lens of this one tradition that is not even, my home cultural tradition. And so,
but a lot of people do that, and then they stay in that, and that becomes their transformed state.
And that's fine. If that's where their journey leads them, that's great.
Was that your plan from the beginning, or were you considering just staying there forever, or was that?
There were times when I was, there were times when I thought, maybe I should follow in John's footsteps,
Mm-hmm.
and he, he wanted me to. But I was never satisfied I was never satisfied that held not even a monopoly on truth, but a sufficient expression of truth. And also, I have this idea that I should do work that no one else can do. And there are shit tons of people that there are Tibetans that are doing this. There are Westerners who are doing this. There's no shortage of people speaking and teaching on Tibetan Buddhism. And so I just decided that's not where my effort, it's not where my talents lie. It's not where my best life is. So I let it go. So I came back and I offered a supper to Hecate, and then Hecate started teaching this very long and involved system of magic. And I kept wanting to write a book about it. And she kept saying no. And of course, this was like early 2000s. So all the rage was like, the Azoatia. And, everybody wanted to have like some limited edition grimoire published in unicorn scrotum that, only the select few had, and, was written in flowery language like Kenneth Grant had beat you to death with a thesaurus. And, I
think we're still there in a lot of ways.
Yeah, a lot of us, we're getting out of there.
People are still doing that.
And so Hecate just kept saying, no books, can't be a book, not shaped like a book, can't be done that way. And then later, when I did start writing, it was to a much wider audience. Obviously, I wrote for New Page, now for Wiser. So less hardcover, boutique press, and more paperback, widely available. Let's get as many of these into the hands of as many people as possible, which is much more me than something like this is, for as cool as those things are to read.
When did you start blogging?
Oh man, it's hard to say because my online presence started in the 90s with groups, thelemic groups. And then I started like a few Yahoo groups, one for Tibetan Buddhists that were interested in magic, one for members of the Chthonic Iranian Temple, which is like this side thelemic order that sparked off in 1984. And then a few other things. And then people in those groups got me into LiveJournal. And so it was like 2001, 2002 maybe when I started like throwing things up in a LiveJournal. And then in 2006, when I published Protection and Reversal Magic with New Page, that was when I was kind of like, I should have not just a LiveJournal, I should have a separate voice. And that's when Strategic Sorcery was born.
Okay, and we're gonna come back to that in a second because I want you to talk about all your courses and stuff. But I want to go back to Nepal for a second because you said that while you were there you learned a tool set of magic, and I'm wondering if you could just share 2 or 3 kind of things that are still maybe with you today, or at least were with you for a while, from that tool set that you gained and what that meant to you.
Well, the Tibetan magic involves a lot of visualization. And not of pentagrams and things, but of beings. Very intensely detailed and crystal clear visions of beings that are then brought your visualization in your mind and also outwardly in the astral area around you is melded in with the literal essence of those beings. And so it's hooked to that. Those beings are drawn into that. They are locked into the visualization, and then they become inseparable from that visualization. And so in Western terms, it's what I would call a transvocation. Mm-hmm. You're where they are, they're where you are. It's inside the mind, it's outside the mind. You're inside their mind, and they're inside your mind. And this is then, so that's the beginning. That's the first step. Then it's deepened. So then you've got to deepen it through mantra recitation and concentration. And then there are methods of deepening it using energetic methods that make it absolutely unmistakable. That this is where the inner heat practices and things come in. You have no mistake. So some of those toolkits, but also in the West, we have this differentiation between ceremonial magic and folk magic, right? And so in Tantra, there really is no differentiation. Stuff that we would look at and say, well, that's like hedge witchery, is part of complex ceremonies. Or complex ceremonies can be distilled down into things that look like hedge witchery.
Okay.
So those are kind of the things that Hecate was like, look, I don't want to make a tantra, but I have an arcana of sorcery to teach that you're kind of ideally suited for, because you've had tantric training, but you're not interested in continuing down that
path exclusively.
Right.
So the things that you teach are influenced heavily by the sort of visionary aspects of Tibetan Buddhism, along with the sort of non-snootery, is that a fair way of saying of the the back and forth between what is a something that you're trying to make something happen in the world, or using a simple object around the house, and along with sort of more philosophical leanings. So
it's kind of funny too, because we always get students who are either from the real like headspace, like, can I just visualize everything? And then you got other students who are from the arts and crafts place, like everything is about the candle and the oil and whatnot. And so they come to Sorcery of Hecate, and throughout the Q&A, you can see like one person will be like, do I really have to visualize all this? Can't I just look at the picture of her and then work with the stuff in my hand? And then you've got the other people that are like, do I really have to do anything physically? Do I have to speak words, or can it all just be in my mind?
Sure.
And so to both of them, I'm like, no, get in here. Like, you've got to do the whole thing to make it work in concert.
So before we get into like the specifics of what it is that you're teaching at this point, I have a couple more questions about you and your personal practice and things. And so you mentioned Hecate, and you mentioned various other the Buddhist beings and just spirits in general. What is your sort of perspective on what that is, and how does it all hang together with they're being from different systems and so forth? Like, how do you create a world in which it all fits and works together?
Last night I made some French style pork tenderloin with a butter sauce. Mm-hmm. And tonight I have leftovers, and I'm probably going to chop it up and throw like a few different types of chili powder and some cheddar and cumin and Tex-Mex type spices into it, and throw it into a wrap, and it'll become, something Tex-Mex inspired. Or I could take it and maybe throw it into a curry, like dump some garam masala and some yogurt and like a store-bought, butter chicken thing or something. So the point being, in the end, there's just food. It's just food. And the stuff you do with it is just stuff you do with it. If you are presenting something that you do and saying this is the authentic old style purely Mexican cuisine, then yeah, you're lying and you're misleading people. So that's misrepresentation. So if I was to do, say, something like the Hecate course and say this is Tantra and this is exactly what Tibetan Buddhists do, I would be misrepresenting, which is why I try to avoid.
I don't think you'd fool that many people either, since she is
definitely not. But people go for it all the time.
No, but I mean, like, she's a Greek goddess, so it would be hard to say that is Tantra.
So, in this case, it's sort of like, in the end, there are just spirits.
But okay, so
there are just people. In the end, there is just operations of magic. In Purba, right? Here's a great example. Everybody's familiar with a Purba, right? The three-sided dagger.
The golden child.
Right. I want the knife. So in Purba, you're summoning your enemy into a triangle that you then liberate it through. If you were to look at a Tibetan manual of Purba practice for the medley portion, which is the stabby bits, you would maybe think, wow, this is like a Tibetan goetic model with a circle and a triangle.
Sounds like it.
Right. So in the end, there really is just magic. And so I think it's wonderful if people are conservative and they get into a particular path and they stay there and they want to uphold that tradition. And I think it's wonderful to be firm and say, look, this is this tradition and that shit over there is not. So like when people put up I forgot what I said, but like the thelemic Odin Nganga or whatever the hell cockamamie thing they throw up, and they try to say, oh, it's Palo. I am fully in support of Palo people going, the fuck it is. But at the same time,
I have to let people know not to have their small children watch this. But
oh, sorry.
No, it's all right. I'm totally kidding. This is not going to like.
Right. Well, my kids are in virtual
school. It's not Disney Channel here. So.
So so it's like that. There's nothing to reconcile.
So the question that I wanted to have you answer, though, is more about yourself and less about your, your perspective as a teacher. Because I get it, magic is magic, whatever. But like when you're talking to Hecate, because here's the thing, like the Tibetan beings that you're speaking about are, in their essence, they're the embodiment of wisdom and emptiness. But Hecate doesn't necessarily have that as her essence, although you can argue differently than that. But how do you feel about the beings that you're working with? What are they to you? And one of the reasons I think that psychologization of magic occurred is because of the fact that we live in a world with a lot of different worldviews. And if you look at things more as being, aspects of consciousness, it's easier to manage that. But I don't feel like most people are satisfied with that answer from a magical perspective. So like, where do you come in on that?
Well, so it sucks magically. And what it is, it's great for academics. It's great for academics to say, well, this is how
psychology.
Yeah, the psychological reductionism is wonderful for discussions. And it can be great for civic religions too, like Unitarians or something. Like if we want to have something
that's my childhood religion.
Right. So if it honors the basic, like if it's a non-offensive thing that honors all the sacred bits that's still in a sacred spiritual way, so not fully secularized, but also not like we're the chosen people and you fuckers are not, then I figure the fucker thing is off the lid. So
yeah, I mean, you can just go every other word now.
Gather ye fucks while ye may, for time is still flying. So it's like that. That's great for those purposes. But for magic, we need the details. And the details are in the nitty gritty. They're in what makes things a little bit different, right? So from my perspective, every being, including us, is spirit, and every being has Buddha nature. That's straight Buddhism right there, Tathagata Garbha, right? So it's really about where that being is oriented for the most part. Like, we're oriented into the physical for the most part. Doesn't mean we don't have etheric, astral, psychonoetic, mental, causal, etc. bodies, but we just we're not naturally oriented to them. We have to do work to shift ourselves.
Sure.
And spirits have to do work, or they have to be dragged kicking and screaming to orient themselves very, very physically if we're not willing to orient ourselves their way. So, in the case of Hecate, I've had lamas say, they consider Hecate to be a Buddha, not just Western lamas either. Tsem Rinpoche once wrote something wonderful about Hecate, but, he wrote about aliens too. So, but he was, Tibetan born. So they are what they are. We're, and we function with them at these different levels. And there are beings that one group says, even within Buddhism, is a Buddha, and another group says, no, that's a Jalpo, it's a harmful spirit. And they'll have arguments, but in the end, things are what they are, and what you get is what you get, and that's what matters, the experience of it. I have this theory that people interact from the head, the heart, or the hand. The head wants to know what everything is, right? The heart wants to know what everything means, and the hand wants to know what stuff does.
Okay.
I am a hand person, so I am all about function. And after that, I'm a little bit about meaning. I'm very little about nailing down what these things firmly are and are not.
Let me ask you this as a follow-up, though. Are there any beings that don't exist, or are there any beings that one shouldn't work with? Either of those two questions. Like, for instance, there are a number of grimoires that some of which have a less they may not be created completely as an exercise in magic from a spirit perspective, but actually be more of a literary thing. And there are some beings that have an inherently extremely malevolent nature, like, for instance, the Testament of Solomon. Is that the right title?
Yeah.
The negative, hurtful entities from that. Are any of those unuseful or non-existent? Like, what's your perspective on that?
I largely think these things are relative. So, for instance, the Testament of Solomon, which really I think we can trace the Livia spirits and Ware and the Goetia and whatnot back to that. These are spirits that the culture that this is coming from, we have decided that they're bad because they're not Christian. And when we approach them, we are shoving them up against the wall and threatening them. So what do you get? Well, what do you get when you take a person and you shove them up against the wall, you stick a badge in their face or a gun to their head and say, do this or I'm going to hurt you? Well, maybe you'll get what you ask for, but you won't get a thing else, and you'll get a lot of resentment. And when it comes time to work again, depending upon the nature of that being, it'll be easy because they don't want to be messed with, or it'll be difficult because they resent you. On the other hand, then you've got some beings that everyone wants to just be nice all the time, right? So they say, oh, well, we should I love to approach the goetic spirits through a lens similar. In my new book, I'm kind of spinning off of Paul Hewson's Conjuration of Visago, right? Okay. In Mastering Witchcraft, where he uses the deacons of the zodiac as the conjuring powers, and then more or less asks Visago to come in, right? So you ask Visago. Visago can show up or not show up. You can make offerings to entice, but you're going to have a very different experience, just like you do with people. Now, there may be some beings who are going to take advantage of that. So you need to be able to be forceful, right? But it doesn't mean that being forceful is the best way to go about everything. Think about if you were like a cop, right?
Uh-huh.
And you go and you want to talk to your son's math teacher. Do you walk in there, flash the badge, shove her against the wall, and tell her you're going to drag her in for some trumped up charge unless your son gets an A? Of course not. You're going to interact with her differently. So to my mind, there are very, very few really rotten, evil people. There are certainly people of bad nature, but I interact with them and I don't want to interact with them again.
Right.
There are spirits of bad nature, and then there are spirits that will only respect, that will comply gratefully, but only after a show of force. And there are spirits who are, you know, the first time I ever summoned Asmodeus, it was like just what the closest that I could think of to evil coming through the triangle.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, well, thanks for coming, but here's the dismissal. Like, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Go in power. Bye-bye. You know, shut this shit down. I don't want anything from you. And then years later, but that operation, that particular operation, was not done in a Husonian style. It was done very much according to the book, with the circle and everything set up, conjurations according to the book. And then years later, I was reading a book by Umberto Meggi about his experiences with Azazel. Not Azazel, Asmodeus. And I was sort of moved. And I said, you know, let me approach this from a different way. And I did, and I got a very different response.
Let me ask you this, though. So there's I get it. Different things can appear different ways, and to different people, too. I mean, you know, some people find one entity very pleasant, and other people say, no, that's a terrible thing. How do you know, you've mentioned a number of beings that you work with. How have you, what has been the process by which you work with one entity, and why don't you keep working with that entity? Why do you move on to another entity? Because there's a lot of people who feel drawn to a bunch of different things, and they aren't sure where to go. Like, what drives you to make that sort of connection, that relationship happen? Or is it just always because they come to you?
No, it's definitely not always because they come to me. There's only been like 2 or 3 times that a spirit that I did not seek out sought me out. So when people are always like, oh, and then she came to me out of the blue, I'm always a little skeptical. And I think people should go ahead and be skeptical of my claims for that as well. So I think that's totally fair as well. But for instance, Saint Cyprian, who I have a strong dedication to, he's a being that I sought out, who, you know, very not even really easy to know at first. But I was fascinated. I had the bug.
What made you get interested in that? Just sort of reading about his personality?
I received a gift. I received a Peruvian vial amulet as a gift from someone that went to Peru. And they almost always have a soapstone image of a saint in them. And this particular one was Saint Cyprian. And he said, this is because he is a sorcerer saint.
Sorcerer like you, yeah.
Right. And so then I started studying how Saint Cyprian works in Peru in the mesas, and I became absolutely fascinated that the shaman have these altars where everything Christian is on the right side and everything demonic is on the left, and Saint Cyprian is there in the middle.
He sits between.
Right. And there was even one shaman who was purely Luciferian. Like, he had a pact with the devil. And so he had vowed never to work with a Christian saint except for Saint Cyprian. because
Now-
he works with other shamans. So then Saint Cyprian manages to like negotiate. So I became fascinated with Saint Cyprian,
It's
began
an
a
interesting
devotional
character.
practice, and unlocked a whole bunch of stuff with effort.
Historically, though, I mean, the story of Saint Cyprian is that he was a sorcerer and a black magician, and he converted to Christianity and was no longer a sorcerer, right? So how do they sort of manage that? But we're going to go back to the sorcery with it. Like, how does that still seem like it makes sense?
Well,
So-
it's the hidden tradition versus the Orthodox tradition, right?
So he didn't actually become a full Christian. He still stayed sort of in the middle.
Depends. I mean, what does a full Christian mean? I mean, he becomes
Don't ask me.
converted because Justina is able to disband his magic. So as a magician, are you like, oh, this is the way, the truth, and the light? Or are you like, well, shit, I got to learn this magic?
Yeah, she's better than I am. So
Right. So he goes and he's interested in magic. And then you kind of, I mean, the history of the grimoire tradition is the history of Christian magic.
Sure.
So I see no reason to think that during the reign of the persecution of Diocletian, that he would have, as a bishop, not been interested in magic.
Especially since almost all of our magical texts have been written by priests, right? So.
Right. So there is, of course, but sure, the Orthodox story is that he renounced magic, and there are stories that he threw his books out the window.
Right.
And that the Witch of Evora gathered them up. And then there are other stories that he remained a sorcerer throughout his whole life, bridging the gap between the pagan and Christian, the demonic and angelic.
And that's why he sits on the altar in the center there, right?
Right. And then there are other stories that say he was just a bishop and a hieromartyr, and that after his death, that's when he started communicating these magical texts.
That's another question about Saint Cyprian. There's a ton of Saint Cyprian material out there of various kinds. I mean, there's not just one sort of Saint Cyprian. Much like the Key of Solomon, there's like just a ton of different stuff. Like how is that? And this goes back to my question that you didn't answer, that you specifically avoided, which is, are there any beings that aren't real? Like, is there Saint Cyprian stuff that should be avoided, or is it all fair game? Not because it's bad, but because it's just baloney.
There's baloney. Well, all right. So let's put it this way. I tend to think we are spirits and we are magic. And I also believe in formless consciousness that takes form. So for instance, when people make servitors, I don't believe that we're really imbuing that servitor with life. I tend to think that we're taking formless consciousness, making that vessel, and it gets filled in according to the nature of the vessel we made.
Right.
And so it is a de facto real spirit within the parameters that we've given.
I had a vision once that what was actually happening was that a spirit was actually kind of going, yeah, that's a job I can do. And actually just like kind of jumping in.
So in that case, I tend to think magic will work. However, and then there's also the idea that what we name is sacred, and what we decide is magic is magic. What
Adam's power.
Right. Adam's power, what the power that Jesus gave to his disciples. If we want to continue with the, what you hold sacred on earth, we will hold sacred in heaven. But that doesn't mean that all magic is created equal and that one should just go out and, invoke Scrooge McDuck and it's the same as Jupiter. There are levels of power and tenacity and grip on reality. And so there's a whole bunch of factors. So I don't want to say that there is certainly garbage out there that would have to overcome a lot to work.
You froze
and
up for a second.
People would need to trip over them. Oh, sorry. That there's a lot out there that's garbage that people would need to basically reinvent the wheel to get it to work. What those things are, I'm not in the business of going around picking apart You know, like I'm not one of these internet fellows that is like, my kung fu is better. You know,
Right.
I challenge this.
One of these fellows.
Right. Yeah. I'm not
Maybe.
interested in that.
I may be interviewing a few of them at one point or another.
I'm sure you are. I'm sure there are a lot out there, you know, the sort of the Musashis of the occult who.
So I guess the question that I have though, like, okay, so you're interested in results, right? And so like if someone is having a result, but they're using a methodology that isn't sort of kosher, you're saying that doesn't really matter as long as it's,
No, it does. It matters. So they're having a result, but I don't like the binary like that. What result
Okay.
are you getting? Like, okay, so somebody once came to me and they were like, you know, I did this 3-hour by the book summoning of Boone. This was when Boone was like the Katy Perry of the occult, right? Just like hugely popular spirit. Everybody was like on the Boone train. So it's like, you know, I did this by the book 3-hour summoning of Boone, and I am reporting an amazing result that all my family was given like 2 cords of firewood for the winter.
Right.
Woo! And I'm thinking to myself, and people are like, oh man, magic is real. It's so great. And I'm thinking to myself, 2 cords of firewood is about $250. You spent 3 hours doing this ritual.
Right.
I'm like, what? Like, yeah, okay. So you got a result. Is it a good result? Is it a life-changing result? Did it really, you know, it's kind of like when people have visions. When people go into the first Hecate course, it's about to start up on the 28th. The first 2 months will be me telling people, ignore it. Don't pay attention to the vision. Like, just don't even worry about it. She's not, whatever she's saying to you right now, deepen that. Like, don't worry about unless she's telling you something you didn't already know and that it's actionable. Just let it go. Go deeper. Like, deepen the experience. Get more real. And so that's the thing. You know, one can create sigils. There's a brand new, like, online sigil generator. But you would have to then take that sigil and invest a lot into it. Whereas there are seals. One of the reasons that for some of my works I employed an artist sorcerer friend, Matthew Brownlee, is because he has a talent for taking spirits that I conjure and have them show to him the action of magic, and him taking that and locking it into a 2-dimensional form that is inherently magical.
Yeah, great artwork. Is he the one who did this thing that we're talking about?
Yeah, well, there's 2 of them in there. There's some more in the financial sorcery book and in the courses, obviously. But there's stuff that is more magical than others and more effective than others. There are spirits that are more effective than others. I mean, this is why people are flocking to Santa Muerte, and they love Santa Muerte, and the church is very upset because they should be going to Guadalupe or St. Jude. But she's performing well. She's giving them the things that she promises. And so there's something there that's inherent. Whereas if you just visualize Scrooge McDuck, you've got a lot of obstacles to overcome with that magic.
But if I mean, yes, I think that many people would feel that way. Other people might not. Some people might think that it's easier to get involved with that because it's less, you know.
Yeah, they're wrong.
Scary. Well, I mean, maybe they are, but like, I mean, until we have sort of a definitive study of the thing, that's just sort of opinion, right? I mean,
let's put it this way. It is opinion, but there have been a lot of people who have engaged in that model of thinking and then left because it wasn't effective.
I do agree with that. It seems like chaos magic as a concept, and that sort of the sillier aspects of it anyway, seem to be somewhat on the wane. And a lot of those folks actually kind of become the grimoire focused people. So
well, that's that pendulum again. They
right.
they run from like a silly extreme to a silly extreme.
Right.
But if you look at people like Aidan Watcher, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's a chaonomist. I'm very honored that he uses the term chaonomism that I came up with, but that really is influenced. Probably Gordon White would be the one who really like brought animism and chaos magic together and said, look, spirits are real. Like there's a reality here beyond just what we think about them. But that doesn't mean that everything about chaos magic is garbage. There's a lot of great things there that we're kind of throwing out in favor of just uber traditionalism. So people they run from one silly extreme to another.
So one final thing on your own life a little bit. How much do you feel like visions actually guide your own choices that you make in life? Because I know Hecate had a big influence. Like where and are most of those visions that do have an influence on your life ones that happen within the circle, or ones that happen sort of as happenstance has them?
So my magic, there's a lot that gets done at an altar against a wall.
Mm-hmm.
Very little is done in a circle these days. Sometimes things are done in a circle, but rarely. There's also a lot of magic that gets done out in the world, out in the fly. I love local beings, and I love going to where they are rather than calling them where I am. So
what would that look like? You're taking a walk in the woods and talking to the trees and stuff, or what do you mean by that?
In a like a particular segment of woods, I might insert myself into the network a little bit.
And there's a feel you're connecting with an entity that is to that place specifically.
Yeah.
And do you find those entities have much power outside of that place, or is that more just like about an experience?
Well, first of all, if it's a place where you live, they can have an enormous amount of influence. If if it's, I live in a whole town named after a mountain, and the mountain overlooks the whole town.
Mm-hmm.
The spirits of that mountain hold enormous sway over everything that happens in its shadow. The spirits of the dead, in the Pine Barrens, I went to great lengths to contact Peggy Clevenger, the Witch of the Pines, who was killed in the 1850s. And when I say great lengths, I mean all over the damn place, until finally she was like, what? Like, and so visions do affect a lot of what I do, and I build practices. Like, I'm not a channeler where the spirits tell me and I write it and give it. It's more like the spirits give direction. I fill that out and see how it works. I present it back. They say, yes, no, change this, don't change this, no, dumbass, that's not at all what I meant. And then eventually I get something that I can give out to a couple people, right? And then it gets tested. And then I can start teaching it. So it usually takes me years to teach something.
The spirit editor, when they're saying those things to you, is that like are you hearing a direct voice saying, no, wrong? Or is it just more of a feeling that's happening as a result of the more informal presentation?
It depends. It can be a voice, literally a voice. It can be a vision too. There are some spirits that communicate with visions that need to be decoded, like the creamed corn in Twin Peaks or something.
Right.
But sometimes there is just the moment where you're putting something together and the spirit or its representative is there to say a little more of this in that incense, So but that said, a lot of what I experience, I throw out. because it's got to pass a bar. It's got to be, is it actionable? And if it's actionable, can I test it in some way? It doesn't have to be like, you know, pass a peer review scientific method, but there has to be some kind of resonance there, some kind of real world thing that I can get a thumbs up, because there's so much gobbledygook that can come through too. And there's so much of your own personal mind that can come through too. So it's about getting a deeper experience rather than just like running away with the flicker of something and then creating a fantasy out of it. So I'm always on my guard for that. So I tell people I usually throw away like 80% of the spirit communications, valid, not valid, or some shade in between. If they're not actionable and they don't tell me anything I didn't already know, then okay, not good, not bad, but there's nothing to do at that point. So whatever.
So the thing that I often say to people who are wanting to be more visionary in their perspective is that visionaries tend to operate in exactly what a lot of the things you just said, where it's not that there's one way that a spirit can communicate to you. There's actually a lot of ways that spirit communicates to you. And what separates the person who's more in the visionary line of things is that they are open to that interaction in various ways, rather than that they, you know, if it's not this one like thunder striking, the universe opening up, a being coming down, you know, like the Hecate experience was more along those lines. But you know, very often it's not that direct, it's not that obvious. And what makes you accepting of that is that you are open to a lot of stuff, and you know, and you also throw a lot of stuff away, but you're letting it come in before you throw it away, rather than saying that can't be it because it's not this amazing thing, right? I mean, there's,
you know, and that's really the trick, is you've got to roll with an experience when it's happening. So I think a lot of people who want to be more visionary, or who call themselves headblind, they'll start to get the glimmer of an experience, and then they'll kind of be like, well, wait, is this really a spiritual experience,
right,
or is it just me? And so what they're doing is they're pulling themselves out of that. It's kind of like astral projection. What tends to happen is that people will start to project, and then they will say, can I still feel my body?
right. Am I in my body? And it's like, right. Well, that's
it's like,
the wrong
are
question.
You dead? Because if you can't feel your body, you're kind of screwed. So they pull themselves out of the experience. So you've got to roll with that experience and just let what happens. You want to try to exercise the skills of refraining from fantasy that really come in meditation, knowing your mind, what your mind feels like, what the texture of your thoughts feel like. But then afterwards, that's when you want to throw it under the microscope and be like, look, every experience I have ever had, I only have in my mind. I only know it through my mind. This interview,
right?
If we talk about the interview we did 10 years ago, we will probably have a very different description of it. But that's because our memory is part perception and part projection. We accurately perceive something somewhat, and we project a lot of ourselves onto that somewhat. So this projection perception ratio that I'm actually writing about right now, that's something that we all have to be aware of, and we have to fine tune. And it's always about getting the ratio better. But always being aware that it's never perfect. Right. So there's always going to be parts of me in there, but it really is about like getting the parts that aren't me to offer a little bit more.
Right.
And so that's really the key.
One of the things I find fascinating is is parapsychology research into like the Ganzfeld field and stuff like that, where they're placing people in a room, they're having them receive an impression of something, and then choose from a number of images which one feels like it's the correct image. Someone is projecting and someone is receiving. And over literally hundreds of thousands of trials in basically double blind. I mean, parapsychology is much more restrictive than even like, the people who are developing vaccines right now. They're because they know that nobody believes what they're doing. They're extremely careful. So, and they've gotten to the point where, like, over time, most people can get significantly over 50% of that correct. Something around like 53, 54%. And someone who's really good at it can get over 60% of it correct. Well, and that's like, that seems amazing to them, and really should seem amazing to anyone that, that you can make those sorts of connections. But you have to keep in mind that you're still, even under those circumstances, like 35% of the time, you're dead wrong. Yep. So, and that is where your own mind is influencing the experience rather than the actual, the perception of what's happening. So, yeah. It really is just, like, having the expectation that things will ever be perfect seems insane to begin with, and that you're always going to get everything right or something like that, or that you're always going to, every spirit is going to always tell you the truth, or,
People run to those extremes.
Right.
You have the people that are like, I doubt every last little thing that I perceive as having any worth, and therefore I am headblind. I need something to where the spirit is in front of me and I can poke it before
right. That would be the only circumstance.
But then on the other hand, you have the spirit said it. That's all I need to know. On a group dedicated, an open group dedicated to Hecate. Somebody was talking about my class, and other people were like, you don't need classes or books or history. You just talk to the goddess and she will tell you everything you need to know. And it's sort of like, well, no, that's the way to just silly land, right? Like, that's how you get some local spirit to just con you,
tell you whatever you want,
or, just mental masturbation, basically. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
All right, so let's talk you and what you're actually teaching at this point, because you've got, is it 3 different courses that you're teaching, or do they run concurrently? Can you only, or have some of them been eliminated? How does that work? Because
I'm losing track. So I used to run every course like in cycles. One course cycle ends, the next cycle ends. And I had to finally like pull back a little bit because of just time constraints. So for people that are interested in getting in with me, the Strategic Sorcery course, that's an email course. So you sign up, you get an email once a week. Excuse me.
And you can sign up anytime for that course.
You can sign up anytime. It's all automated, and then you'll get an invitation to the chat room that you can talk with other people, and you'll be invited to the global rights and things like that. But it's all just more or less email rolls whenever you start. Then there's my more involved courses. So the Sorcery of Hecate, definitely the most popular. Where we're now moving into its 11th cycle.
Wow.
And so.
And how often do you cycle that?
It's a 7-month course. So every 6-7 months it opens up, and it's that has been going for quite a while, and there's no sign of it slowing down. Every cycle seems to grow. There's a part 2 and a part 3 now of that course. Part 2 will be offered immediately after part 1. Mm-hmm. Part 3, that might happen once a year or so.
So
then I've got the Black School of St. Cyprian course. That's every 5 months. And that too, it'll just roll from one cycle to the next. And there's a part 2 of that as well.
And so you're individually teaching each class? You're teaching each of these classes? Or
each of these. So with both of those classes, right, there's audio lessons that were recorded in the first cycle. Mm-hmm. So that every class gets the same lesson.
Right.
No matter what. And then the following week, there's a Q&A. So throughout, you'll get the lesson, and there's a place for people to post questions. And they'll post questions out the wazoo. And then the following week, I will record. Now I'm just talking to you, to that group, and I answer the questions in detail.
Gotcha.
I finished a recording just before we got on, and that was like 90 minutes of Q&A, audio, broken up into a few different files.
So what's the, what's like, what is the difference between those three courses? Other than, the structure of the first one is slightly different. It's like, what are you learning in one that you aren't learning in the other? Like,
Well, strategic sorcery is really about how to be strategic with sorcery. It really is a course in basic magic, how to get things done. And it's made in such a way that the rituals can either be used on their own, or the concepts can be brought into whatever it is you're already doing. So when I wrote that course, I kind of had it in mind. Like most courses in magic are written thinking that people are going to be doing this and only this. I wrote this with the expectation that people are probably doing other things as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is a general course in how to make your magic more effective no matter what you're doing. And
there's no sense of sort of like you're improving yourself as a person. There's no sort of like a
Sure there are. Because I mean, honestly, you can only make so much if people are trying to get ahead in life. Let's say, all right, myself, when I was younger, I struggled with money, not just financially, but as a concept.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I just didn't really gel. I kind of viewed materialism as the enemy of spirit and magic and everything else. Gen X slacker,
sure.
90s era
mm-hmm.
thing. And so I would do magic for money, and it would manifest whatever I needed.
A cord of wood.
Right, that kind of thing. But then if I needed more than that, it would either not come or it would manifest, and then I would have other expenses that would just eat that
mm-hmm.
up, right? So to get my magic for real wealth magic to work, financial sorcery, not just money magic, to work, there had to be growth as a human being. The inner game had to change, because if not, the outer game has nothing to latch onto. It'll throw up all these opportunities. You won't recognize them or be able to take advantage of them. Your entire framework for how money works, or how love works, or how, whatever it is, or how power works, is different if all you're doing is magic for that thing. If everything is, well, I'm perfect as I am, I just need other people and other events to line up, then you're going to fail in the long run. It's not that the magic is going to fail. Any individual piece of magic is probably going to give you a result. But a year or two from now, you're going to be in the same place. So if you want magic that really builds, then you have to be part of it. So sure, in strategic sorcery, there's a lot about meditation, contemplation, entities that you resonate. There's thought management classes. So all that kind of stuff is in there, because there is no strategic sorcery without that.
Do you need that course to do your other two courses, or
no?
So
people can join Sorcery of Hecate and go right into it.
And so why would you take the strategic sorcery course then? If you
wanted to be better at magic.
So the Hecate course, is that more of a spiritual focus, or is it still around practical things as well?
It's a very specific magical practice that builds one lesson upon another. So whereas strategic sorcery is sort of like, here are these principles, and here's some examples of this principle as motion, go apply it. Strategic sorcery is like, this is what you're doing, and you need to get this in place before you do the next bit, or the next bit is not going to work. And the effects are spiritual and sorcerous as well, because I'm not really interested in any one without the other.
Is the Hecate course influenced a lot by the Greek magical papyri, or is it totally wholly your own kind of stuff?
No, it's influenced by the Greek magical papyri. I have an attitude towards revelation that if revelation doesn't play with research, then it's probably garbage. So here's an example. One of the first things Hecate showed me, other than an image of herself in a different form, which is you've probably seen in the adverts for Sorcery of Hecate, this multi-armed dancing form. But there's also 4 guardians that I wrote about in Protection and Reversal Magic.
Mm-hmm.
Now these names, I was able to kind of loosely relate them to this spirit or that spirit. But the images is one of a bull-headed, a horse-headed, a serpent-headed, and a dog-headed guardian spirit. And so I just it was a very strong vision. And I took it on faith and I started working it. I gave it out to a couple people. And it was later, after I had that vision, that somebody turned me on to Steve Ronan's The Goddess Hecate, which is largely about Chaldean Hecate in the Chaldean oracles. But in that book, he describes not 4 individual spirits, but a tetratic form of Hecate with a bull, horse, serpent, and dog head, related to the elements in exactly the way that Hecate related these spirits to the elements. So that, to me, is revelation and research playing and kind of, I don't want to say confirming one another. I think that's too strong of a word. But playing together enough that they're informing one another.
Okay.
And that's where, for me, the magic happens. If it's all just research and reconstruction, it usually feels dead to me. But if it's all just research, if it's all revelation and I saw this and the spirit said this, then it's just wild hoo-ha. It's got to have roots.
Maybe. I mean, maybe it will be not wild hoo-ha. I don't want to make that. I'm not gonna join you quite there, but I'm not gonna disagree with you entirely either. So Saint Cyprian, that course, you said it was more about sort of sorcery that's related to Saint Cyprian. How is that different from the strategic sorcery class then?
Well, that too is a course that builds one thing upon another. So there are purification exercises at the beginning.
Okay.
And exercises where you're orienting yourself. It starts off as a very Christian course, actually. And then it moves into a Luciferian perspective. And then when we've got both of those kind of in hand, then we can start conjuring. But we teach conjuring in a number of modes. So rather than saying, well, what we do here is just demand spirits appear no matter what, we start off with what's called the baptism of demons, which is actually a traditional rite that I learned from 2 people. One of them is a brujo, I guess, or a curandera, and another one is Conjurman Ali. Both shared the same rite with very common, they were basically the same rite with just very few differences. And so we move into that as a way of sort of a more friendly interaction with demons. And then we move into an invitational way of working with demons. And then we move into a more forceful exorcism-based way, where really we're using evocations based on Mengi's exorcisms. So we now move to like really, really forceful. And so the idea is there are different scenarios where each of these is going to be appropriate. And I can't tell you what they are. So you need to have them all. Right?
And so in your own personal work then, do you find yourself doing more things from strategic sorcery, more things from the Hecate course, or more things from the Saint Cyprian stuff? Like, which one is yours? Where's your heart? Like, and
it changes year to year, month to month. It doesn't change day to day because I don't flit about like that. but I have a daily practice for everything I do. But that daily practice can be condensed down quite a bit. And so once that daily acknowledgement that just, it doesn't really move you forward, it just keeps you in the game, right? It's like a chess move where you're just bouncing a pawn back and like a king back and forth. You're not really doing anything but it keeps the game moving. So it's like that. And then whatever else I do, it could be that Lucifer is just like all over my world at the moment. So anything that needs to happen is happening through that lens. Or it could be Saint Cyprian, or it could be Hecate.
How much of your strategic sorcery course and any other courses, although certainly these older books wouldn't have some of your more recent stuff in it, but how much is present in your books that's in the courses? Like, how connected are those things to each other?
The courses take off from where the book ends.
Okay.
So the only exception to that, really, well, let's put it this way. Protection and Reversal Magic and the Sorcerer's Secrets, those are kind of like the courses take off from there. So there's no repeat elements other than, hey, look in this book for the information on this. I don't want to bore you with stuff I've already written in a book, right? What I will say is that there are elements in the Strategic Sorcery course on finances where it kind of works the other way around. Like, there are 2 or 3 lessons on financial sorcery in the Strategic Sorcery course, but Financial Sorcery, the book, is a much bigger and better exploration of that. There's 1 lesson on sex magic in the Strategic Sorcery course.
But your book is much larger.
But the book is a deeper exploration.
Gotcha.
But as far as like the Sorcery of Hecate or the Black School of Saint Cyprian courses, they're course shaped. They don't go into the books. The books don't go into them. Final thoughts here.
Are there any aspects of your writings or your courses that if you could go back and change? Because one of the challenges is we are developing as people. And there may be things that you've said or done or suggested that you're not as in support of. Can you think of anything like that, or do you feel like you only present it once it's in the final form and you could never have a?
Oh no! I definitely couldn't think of things that I would certainly write differently or change differently. In fact, I just. Last year we did what I called the Strategic Sorcery Deep Dive. So people could sign up for it, and every week we gave 1 lesson, the same lessons they've already gotten, because it was only open to people that had already taken the course. But I would do a Q&A every week based on that lesson, and a commentary on like what I thought was good, what I thought was not appropriate anymore, what I thought we could do better. And so there was a whole lot of things that I think of a little bit differently now. There are things that I've included that didn't age well. Recently there was a few groups actually chose the Sorcerer's Secrets as like a book study, right? And so in the Sorcerer's Secrets, in the influence chapter, I wrote about like pickup artists that I had met that were like very dedicated to changing themselves, to because they're motivated by getting laid. But the thing is, when I wrote that whole scene was really about how do we get men to not be crippled by the idea that they would of rejection? Like, how do we get them to be okay with being rejected, right? And how do we approach women without women being creeped out because we're being too aggressive? Like, so it was like that. It still had hey, I'm out to get, a girl. But I mean, that's just, more or less time-honored way of looking at it. But
isn't everybody ultimately out to get a girl
over the years, right? It then became over the years this very like misogynistic beast, where that idea that the person who's doing it should take no for an answer was just thrown out, and then it developed this whole incel madness and so I actually wrote, like, when people said they were reading the book, I went ahead and I wrote like hey, this looked very differently back then. It did not age well at all. So let me be the first person to say, if I was writing this today or re-editing it,
the pickup artist elements,
I would take that stuff. I mean, it's not really elements of the work. It's just a mention.
Sure.
But it was a mention in a positive light of something that is now so, and I was married by the time I wrote that. So it's not like, I was out there. I'm a boring monogamous married dude. So, but it was one of those things that it turned into something that I am so vehemently opposed to now that I'm just like, whoa, that didn't age well at all.
Well, I mean, I don't recall the context in which you had it, but I do think sometimes it's okay to use metaphors that are for things that you wouldn't necessarily 100% support and still see the way that it applies. You can't necessarily just,
No, but if people were to look at it now and look for the metaphor in that community as it exists today, they wouldn't see it.
They wouldn't see what you were trying to say.
Right.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
What about sort of structurally or spiritually or practically? Are there things that you would change or no? I mean, I know this is kind of out of the blue question, but
No, it's not out of the blue. Nah, things happened more or less well. It's not that I think that they're perfect, but I just don't expend the energy looking back all that much.
So I guess where this question series is coming from is I'm wondering, is strategic sorcery still something that you feel is an important thing for people to go through, or are you more leaning towards your more recent creations and that's really where your heart is? You know what I mean?
No, I think it is important. I mean, strategic sorcery is, first of all, it's important because of just the pure finances of it. I mean, for the Sorcery of Hecate and for the Black School, where I am every week going to be, doing long Q&As, answering in immense detail.
Sure.
And where I put work in to craft a training that, lasts for months and builds upon each other. The cost of that is like $100 a month. So it's significant for people.
Mm-hmm.
It's less than what the apprenticeship program was when I was doing that. But, this was a way for me to get close to that and still be available to more people. Whereas the strategic sorcery course, that's like $3 a week, like $150 for a year of emails. So you're getting like $3 a week. You're joining a community where, it's just a Facebook group or now a Mighty Network group as well. But there's no politics or social commentary allowed. It's not that I don't have strong feelings about these things. It's just that we have the whole rest of the internet to do that. So let's not do it here. And in an emphasis on field reports, a demand for politeness. I mean, I've tossed people out that I know personally who were saying things that I agreed with, but they couldn't bring themselves to be polite online. So they had to go.
Sure.
So that kind of thing, people have said, actually, like, that is worth the price of admission right there. Just to have
a space to not have people go in there.
Right. Like, not to have a community where you can go in and ask a question and the answers will be sorcery based, not you suck, you shouldn't think this way, you're a piece of garbage, and whatever my political, economic, social view is, means that you're, a bad person. So it's stuff like that, I think strategic sorcery, I think the lessons are as solid as ever. There are things that I would change a little bit here and there, but
do you ever make changes, or has it stayed the same basically the whole time?
I thought about it when strategic sorcery ended. I think I put in the future I'll be going over these and tweaking them, and because when I finished it, it was such a mammoth work to have done like
Sure.
a year of lessons that average like 4,000 words each, right? So it's like a 52 chapter book. Like, and I did it when my kids were babies and my wife had, medical issues. So it was exhausting. And so at the end of it, I didn't really have a concept of how much else I would have in me to get out. And then, so people have asked, like, are you ever going to redo these lessons? They could use some editing and things like that. And people have stepped forward, like, I'll do the editing. And it always is kind of like, well, there's nothing in there that people can't understand because of the editing.
Sure.
And there's maybe some tweaks here and there, but the amount of time and effort I would have to put into literally redoing the whole lessons would rob me and you or whoever's listening to this, if you like my stuff. If you don't like my stuff, then it hasn't robbed you of anything. But if you like the cut of my jib, so to speak, then it robs you of the stuff that I'm really excited and passionate to teach about.
So what is it that you're excited about right now that you're moving into at this moment? You were just saying you were writing something. So what is it you're doing now?
I've got two big things that I'm super passionate about right now. So I'm about 2/3 of the way done with a book. It will be my first book. I mean, all my books are now owned by Wiser, so they'll go out under Wiser imprints from now on. But this is the first one that I'm writing for Wiser, called Consorting with Spirits. And so it is a guide to my view on spirit work, and it covers everything from local spirits to various ways to look at grimoire spirits, to the skills needed and so I'm pretty passionate about that.
Sounds like a fun book.
Yeah. I'm still as passionate ever about Hecate and Saint Cyprian. I have just completed the second part of the Black School, Deeper into the Black School, which ends with like a black liturgy that I was scared to throw out there, and that's usually the first sign that something worthy is being thrown out there. So people love that. I'm working on the third section of the Sorcery of Hecate, which is coming out. Just those juices flow. And then in the thing I'm most excited about, but it's still a ways off, is around Candlemas or maybe Equinox, I'll be launching a course related to Jupiter, but really it's about the sorcery of achievement.
Okay.
So
sounds like a good one.
It gives Jupiterian magic and not wealth magic, but achievement magic, the kind of treatment that I gave the Sorcery of Hecate work and the Black School work, where we'll be doing audio lessons with audio Q&As and other ways to make that a deeper, more immersive experience for people. So
that does all sound like exciting stuff.
Yeah.
I want to thank you. I think we've probably, I feel like we might have gone a little bit past, especially since you did have to have that bathroom break. So I apologize for taking up so much of your time, but I really appreciate the chat. Hopefully this was as good as our previous one, which of course in my mind, it was one of the greatest chats ever because it doesn't exist. So I can't, really be sure what happened. So
I think this was better. It was certainly longer.